The great Smokey Yunick knurled piston skirt debate of 2025. Anybody who knows me knows that I live for a good debate, and I think we got one going over here. So I'll bring you up to speed. Let's add some context to this. A week or two ago, I did an installment on our 383 rescue, where we're just taking this 383 and putting it back together again with as little, finesse as possible, just to see what it's going to do. We're going to rescue this engine, throwing nothing but the basics at it. So I was talking about the pistons and putting rings on pistons and so on and so forth. And in that video, I brought up the topic of knurling and how knurling used to be a common practice to take up slop between the piston skirt and the cylinder wall. In that video, I also mentioned that Smokey Yunick at some point was knurling pistons to make power with. And the idea was that the high points of the knurl would contact the cylinder wall instead of the flatter surface, and it would reduce friction and therefore create more power at the crankshaft. So obviously, reducing friction is not the same as creating power, but it don't matter when it comes out the back of the crank how you got it, through fire in the mixture or by reducing drag inside the motor. The flywheel doesn't care. So I mentioned that. Now, unbeknownst to me at the time, there's another channel, Daniel Soles, who's a machinist down in Florida, and he has a lot of Smokey Yunick's old machinery. And he works with Faye Hadley. I'm sure you guys are familiar with her. So he did a video on Smokey Yunick and knurling pistons. Go figure, right? The coincidence was pretty crazy. And he goes on to demonstrate the piston knurler and so on and so forth. All right. Now, where I got my information from was a factoid that I stuck in the back of my head 40 years ago. Smokey Yunick used to write a column for, I believe it was Circle Track magazine, and this was back in the 1980s. And I would read it. Anything Smokey wrote, I'm going to read. So even though I had no interest in Circle Track racing, I was strictly a straight liner. And I remembered him talking about modern pistons at the time and piston coatings and treatments, and then referring back to knurling pistons in the old days to reduce friction. Now this factoid just stuck in my head, and when I was talking about regular pistons, I just brought that up. All right, so that's where I got mine from. So now, Daniel Powell from Powell Machine, a channel I watch, I have great respect for. He gets involved in this debate. And he's like, no, there's no merit to it. The piston never comes in contact with the skirt, never comes in contact with the cylinder wall. It rides on a film of oil. So no, it's not going to make any difference. So last Wednesday night, I'm getting ready to do our normal Wednesday Night Live with Dr. Art. And while I'm waiting for Dr. Art to show up, I'm reading through the comments on these videos. And I'm like, okay, they're talking about Smokey Yunick, they're talking about knurled pistons. Let me throw 2 cents in here because I don't see anybody mentioning this. So I threw my 2 cents in. And my 2 cents was, if you take your flat hand, and that represents the piston skirt, and you've got this table represents the cylinder wall. If I lay my hand flat on the table and push it with a moderate amount of force pushing down, there's a good bit of friction. Now, if I take just the tips of my fingers, just my fingernails, and pushing down with the same amount of effort, there's a lot less friction. Okay? See the table moving back and forth? Now I'm not going to change the effort, I'm just going to switch to the tips of my fingers. Okay, so that was my answer to why Smokey probably, his reasoning behind knurling the piston. Context again, we have to go back to context. This was all done decades and decades ago, before modern pistons were available, before modern coatings or any of that was available. Smokey was working with basically factory parts and trying to maximize them to get any gains he could. This was Smokey Yunick's trademark. Not saying that this is viable today, although I guess it would work. If it worked then, it'll work now, but no, it's not the viable way to make power today. They coat pistons. We're going to get to that. So, in Daniel Powell's video rebuttal to my video, he brought up a couple of points. And I have to paraphrase because it was a pretty long video, and I'm trying to keep this relatively short and concise. So he says, well, that has nothing to do with it because the piston rides on a film of oil, right? The skirt rides on a film of oil. There's never any contact there. But even if there was contact, it would just, one surface, smooth surface would just slide off of the other surface. And he used an example of 2 machined plates, very heavy plates, like 1,000, 1,500 pounds, whatever they were. And he was surprised that he was able to take these 2 flat machine surfaces that weighed a tremendous amount, and with a small amount of lubricant, he was able to just easily slide one off the other. No question that's going to work. Now, for this, I go back to Keith Black. Now, remember, I study when there's somebody I admire. I study everything that they say. I study everything that they do, and I try to glean as much information as I could. So again, I can't cite this specifically, but maybe one of you guys can help. So Keith Black would contribute stories to some of the drag racing magazines of the 1960s. And in one of these stories, he was talking about the preparation of early Hemis, 392 style. And he was saying that he went from grinding cylinder head surfaces to cutting them because he found that the ground surfaces were too smooth. And to illustrate this for that story, he was talking about taking 2 cylinder heads that had been ground smooth, ground completely flat, right? Which was the normal practice of the day. And taking these 2 machined cylinder heads, put them deck surface to deck surface, and he was able to slip a piece of paper between those 2 cylinder heads. He says because of that, he took to cutting the deck surfaces, which is the common practice today. So they don't grind them anymore, they cut them. Those 2 surfaces have some texture to work against. All right. So in Daniel's example, he's able to slide the one machine plate over the other. Yes, there's no question that's going to work. The film of oil has no place to hide in a completely ground surface. But neither cylinder walls or piston skirts are completely flat. They both have texture. The cylinder wall has a texture through the crosshatch, and piston skirts all have a texture through these little lines that are in there. And the purpose of that is to hold a film of oil, the same way the crosshatch in a cylinder wall is supposed to hold a film of oil. So it's not the same thing. A completely glass ground machine surface is not the same as one that has a texture. Now, also in this discussion, the general gist of it is that the piston skirt never comes in contact with the cylinder wall. But yet, in Daniel's own video, he shows examples, there were 3 pistons, shows examples of skirts that came in contact with cylinder walls. And I mean, this is a pretty extreme example. This is just something I grabbed off the scrap pile. But yes, skirts do come in contact with cylinder walls on occasion. It's not supposed to be, but it does happen. So that leads to today's modern pistons that have coatings. So now back when I was in nitro racing in the 1980s and 1990s, we used to use nylitron buttons in the skirts. So we would have 3 or 4 buttons, like little round buttons that were pressed into the piston skirt, and the purpose of those nylitron buttons was to keep the skirt off of the cylinder wall, so that oil film would be allowed to stay in place. Because once the skirt actually digs into the cylinder wall, there's no recovering from that. It scrapes the oil film off, heat builds instantly, and then that heat will repel any oil that comes to save the day. Like that. I have no idea what they use in modern top fuel cars today, but this is what we used in the 1980s and the 1990s. So if there is no circumstance where the skirt comes in contact with the cylinder wall, then why are modern pistons coated? Doesn't that not take that into consideration? Does the coating not keep the metal of the skirt from contacting the metal of the cylinder wall? Of course it does. So therefore, any barrier that you can put between the actual skirt material and the cylinder wall is going to act to your benefit under certain circumstances. So in this case, it's a coated piston. In Smokey's case, before there was such a thing as coated pistons, before there were nylitron buttons, before there was anything, and he was working with Hudson Hornet and small block Chevy, pistons and stuff like that, his way of creating this situation was to knurl. Now, did it work? I don't know. It may have, it may not have. How much power does it make? I don't know. It's kind of like the offset piston thing. How much power does it make? It depends. It depends on far too many circumstances. Is it worth testing? Probably not. This is a very archaic technique. This is something that was done before, right? That's the thing. I'm reading through these comments. Some of you guys are really out there. This is ancient technology. This is the roots and the history that led to the evolution that gave us the modern ways, right? Coated pistons in this case. So, does that settle it? I don't know. But I'm more than willing to go as far as necessary until it's understood that Smokey Yunick experimented with things, and he reported on the things that he experimented with. Did they work or not? I don't know. But I don't think he would have reported on it as a success or something that worked if it flat out didn't. So, again, context. This is something that I picked up, a little factoid that I picked up from Circle Track magazine 40-something years ago, written by Smokey, where he was talking about piston coatings, protecting the skirts, and knurling pistons. This is where I got mine from. And then the Soles got his from the actual Smokey Yunick machinery that he owns and he messes around with. He's got one of the hot vapor cars too. Not every one of Smokey Yunick's ideas worked out perfectly. The point is, he was an experimenter. And I always see people discredit him. Oh, but he was a cheater. Smokey Yunick didn't cheat. Smokey Yunick was a creative rules interpreter, meaning that if it didn't say specifically that you could not do something, it meant that you could. That was Smokey Yunick's, that was his method behind all of his madnesses. Fantastic, brilliant person. Very not misunderstood, but underrated today. But it was like, again, it was people like him, pioneers like him, and the creative process that they went through that led to all of the stuff that we have today, all of the knowledge that we have today was built on those foundations. Now, is it a viable thing? Is knurling pistons a viable way to make power? And yes, wait, before I even go there, there's something else that popped into my head after that. What about oil film shear? Right? So the piston is moving up and down in the bore at ridiculous speed. The oil film is being reversed back and forth. How many times a second? What about the shear effort on that oil? Making that oil film reverse rotation as a big film. So let's just say, for example, this entire skirt is covered completely, isolated from the cylinder wall with a film of oil. Every time this piston goes up, every time this piston goes down, that oil film has to reverse direction. Now, if you've got just the high points of a knurl coming in contact with the cylinder wall, or coming in contact with that oil film, there's far less shear involved. Many times, multiple times, less oil is involved with just the little tips of the knurl, the high spots of the knurl, as opposed to the whole flat surface. So that's another possibility. Nobody put words in my mouth. I'm not saying that that's what it is. I'm saying that's a possibility as to why this would work or why it wouldn't work. But, again, is this a viable thing today? Well, probably not, especially when you can buy, this is just a regular stock replacement piston for a 4-liter Jeep engine, and even these things come coated. So no, it's probably not a viable thing today. Is it something that you could try? Sure. Is it something that it's not going to hurt anything, for sure. Is it something that needs to be tested to see if this works? No, that's nonsense. It's something that was done in the distant past. And it's an edge that may or may not work if you choose to try it, just like piston offset. All right, so this already went on longer than I wanted it to, but that's okay. This is a good topic. This is an interesting subject. I don't know if I left anything out. Daniel, in your video last night, you says, well, you hope that this ends the debate. Oh, God, no, it doesn't end the debate. It just kind of throws more fire on it. But then again, debate is good. This is how ideas get exchanged. And, yeah, maybe we're spending more time than we'd like to on a subject like this. But our viewers, they love this because they pick up information. They learn from this, or at least it broadens their horizons and gets them to think. So therefore, a subject like this is literally the most valuable thing that we can offer our viewers. Think of it that way. I do love your channel. I have great respect for you, my brother. And if you want to continue this, let's do it. If you want to do it live, let's do it. But yeah, that's it. The great Smokey Yunick knurled piston debate. Is this the end or just the beginning? I'll see you tomorrow.